If I had known my biggest distraction at work would come in the form of graphite lines on a sketchpad, maybe I wouldn't have taken this job in the first place. Then again, maybe I would have, just for the punishment of it. Because who the hell expects their desk neighbor to spend half their day drawing you your face, your hands, sometimes even the way you bite your lip when you're deep in thought? It was ridiculous, intrusive, and strangely intoxicating. And it was Ethan. Daniel liked to think of himself as a professional. 27 years old, newly hired in the New York branch of an advertising firm that smelled of burnt coffee and ambition. He wore neatly ironed shirts, kept his desk spotless, and reminded himself every morning that this job was a stepping stone, not the endgame. Stability first, dreams later. But then there was Ethan. Ethan didn't fit into Daniel's neatly pressed world. He had that disheveled, too cool to care look rolled up sleeves, a tie that always seemed like it was about to strangle him, so he wore it loose, and a voice that carried a trace of laughter even when he wasn't smiling. He was 25, brimming with artistic arrogance and the kind of reckless confidence Daniel envied but never admitted out loud. From day one, Ethan had chosen his seat beside Daniel. Not across, not diagonal, but right there close enough that Daniel could feel the brush of his elbow if either of them shifted too much. And from day one, Ethan had started sketching. At first Daniel thought it was coincidence. Maybe Ethan just liked drawing people. But when he saw the unmistakable angle of his own jawline on Ethan's notepad, he froze. "Are you drawing me?" Daniel had asked one Tuesday morning. His voice caught somewhere between disbelief and irritation. Ethan didn't even look up. "Depends. Are you flattered or offended?" Daniel's mouth went dry. "You neither. Just confused." That was the beginning. By the second week, it was no longer an occasional doodle. It was a ritual. Ethan would rest his sketchpad casually on the desk, pencil tapping, and within minutes Daniel would feel the weight of invisible eyes studying him. His posture, his expressions, the way he gripped his pen, Ethan captured it all. And though Daniel told himself it was intrusive, he never once asked Ethan to stop. Because there was something else hiding in those sketches. Something Daniel wasn't sure he was ready to face. The office itself was a stage set for tension. Glass walls, long corridors echoing with hurried footsteps, the hum of fluorescent lights that never dimmed. Yet in that sea of sameness, Ethan created a bubble around them filled with pencil shavings, careless laughter, and the faint scent of cologne that Daniel found himself noticing more often than he should. "You know you frown when you're reading emails," Ethan said one afternoon, sketching quickly. Daniel glanced sideways. "That's because they're usually full of bad news." Ethan smirked, eyes still fixed on the page. "Looks better on you than a smile." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He looked back at his screen, pretending not to care, pretending his pulse wasn't betraying him. What Daniel didn't realize was that his resistance, his carefully constructed walls, were exactly what kept Ethan intrigued. Ethan lived for reactions, for cracks in the armor. And Daniel, with his cautious demeanor and polite distance, was the most interesting subject Ethan had ever drawn. The first time Daniel saw one of the finished sketches, he couldn't breathe. It was after hours. Most of the office had emptied out, the city lights flickering alive beyond the windows. Daniel had dropped a pen, and when he bent to pick it up, his eyes fell on Ethan's open sketchbook. There he was. Not just lines on a page, not just some casual doodle, this was him. The tilt of his head, the curve of his lips, the tired determination in his eyes. Ethan had drawn him like he mattered, like every piece of him was worth studying. Daniel should have been furious, should have slammed the sketchbook shut and demanded privacy. But instead, he lingered. His throat tightened, He had never felt so seen and so vulnerable at the same time. Like what you see. Ethan's voice startled him. Daniel snapped the sketchbook closed, cheeks burning. I wasn't. Ethan leaned against his desk, arms crossed, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Don't worry. You look better on paper. Daniel hated how much he wanted to believe that. The weeks passed, and the sketches multiplied. They became their unspoken secret, hanging between them in the air thick with tension. Daniel caught himself wondering what Ethan saw when he looked at him so intently. Did he see the careful man Daniel pretended to be? Or the restless, longing Daniel buried under routine and restraint? One Friday evening, as the office emptied for the weekend, Ethan lingered. So did Daniel. The silence stretched, broken only by the scratch of pencil on paper. Finally, Ethan tore the page out and slid it across Daniel's desk. For you, he said simply. Daniel hesitated, staring at the page. It was him again, this time softer, warmer, almost vulnerable. It wasn't how he saw himself, but maybe how Ethan did. Why? Daniel asked quietly. Ethan leaned closer, their shoulders brushing. Because I can't stop seeing you, even when I close my eyes. Daniel's breath caught. The city lights blurred outside the window, and for the first time, he didn't know whether to run or stay. That night, Daniel lay awake in his small apartment, the sketch on his nightstand. He replayed Ethan's words, the closeness, the subtle daring in his voice. Daniel had spent years hiding from parts of himself he wasn't ready to face, building walls that felt safer than honesty. But with one sketch, Ethan had found the cracks, and Daniel wasn't sure he wanted them sealed again. By the end of that month, Daniel had stopped pretending. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't even tell Ethan. But his silence had shifted. Where once there was resistance, now there was a quiet surrender. When Ethan sketched him, Daniel no longer looked away. When their shoulders brushed, he didn't move. And when Ethan's laughter filled the office, Daniel let himself smile, even if just a little. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and inevitable. And Daniel knew whether he wanted it or not, this was only the beginning. Daniel told himself he wasn't thinking about Ethan over the weekend. He told himself the sketch resting on his nightstand was just a piece of paper. Nothing more. He told himself it meant nothing that he'd checked it again before bed on Friday, again on Saturday morning, and again Sunday night as if it might have changed while he wasn't looking. He told himself a lot of things. But when Monday morning arrived and he walked back into the office, he knew he was lying. Because the very first thing he did wasn't checking his email, wasn't pouring coffee, wasn't saying hello to his manager. The very first thing he did was glance at Ethan's desk, half expecting, half dreading that gaze, that smirk, that inevitable pencil in motion. And there he was, Ethan, already leaned back in his chair, sketchpad balanced lazily on his knee, pencil tapping against the page as if he'd been waiting for Daniel all along. Morning, Ethan said casually, as though nothing about what they'd shared the week before had changed the air between them. Daniel swallowed, nodded stiffly. Morning. Their eyes met for a fraction too long, long enough for Daniel's chest to tighten. He turned quickly to his computer, fingers hovering uselessly over the keyboard. But the scratching of pencil filled the silence. Steady, relentless. By Tuesday, the sketching had grown bolder. Ethan didn't hide it anymore. He leaned openly on Daniel's desk, angling the pad so Daniel could see the lines forming. Hold still, Ethan teased one afternoon, tongue caught between his teeth as he concentrated. Daniel groaned. Ethan, I'm trying to work. And I'm trying to capture your annoyed professional look. Do me a favor. Don't ruin it by smiling. Daniel bit back a laugh. He hated how easily Ethan disarmed him. How quickly irritation melted into something else entirely. You're impossible, Daniel muttered. Yeah, Ethan said, flashing him that mischievous grin. But you're still here. The words lingered, heavy and dangerous. Daniel busied himself with his screen, but his pulse was a drumbeat he couldn't quiet. By Wednesday, others began to notice. Ethan, you still doodling during office hours? One of their coworkers, Marissa, asked with a laugh as she passed by. Not doodling, Ethan replied smoothly. Portraits. Daniel stiffened, praying no one looked too closely. Of who? Marissa teased. Ethan's eyes flicked to Daniel. Just for a second. Enough to make heat rush to Daniel's cheeks. Someone worth sketching, Ethan said vaguely, and the conversation moved on. But Daniel knew. Ethan knew. And for the first time, Daniel realized just how fragile the balance they'd struck really was. Thursday was the day Daniel almost lost his composure. The office had been tense all morning, deadlines piling. Tempers short. Daniel sat stiffly at his desk, trying to fix a presentation slide that refused to cooperate. He rubbed his temples, frustration mounting, when Ethan's hand suddenly reached across and plucked the mouse from his grip. Here, Ethan said, voice low, leaning in so close Daniel could feel his breath. You're overcomplicating it. Watch. Daniel froze, every nerve in his body on high alert. Ethan's arm brushed against his. Steady. Warm. Distracting in ways Daniel didn't dare name. There. Ethan said after a few clicks. Done. Daniel turned his head. And for one suspended moment, they were too close. Too close to pretend. Too close to laugh it off. Ethan's eyes flicked to his lips, and Daniel's breath caught. Thanks. Daniel blurted, pulling back so fast his chair squeaked. Ethan smiled faintly, almost knowingly. Anytime. The rest of the day, Daniel couldn't look him in the eye. By Friday, Daniel was exhausted from his own resistance. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. You okay? He asked quietly, sketchbook resting closed for once. Daniel hesitated. He wanted to lie, but his voice betrayed him. I don't know. Ethan tilted his head, studying him not with an artist's eye but with something softer, gentler. Want to get a drink after work? No sketchbook. Promise. The invitation hung in the air like a dare. Daniel hesitated too long, silence stretching, until finally he nodded. Yeah. Okay. The bar was dimly lit, tucked in a corner of the Lower East Side. The kind of place where no one cared who you were as long as you tipped well. Ethan ordered whiskey. Daniel stuck to beer. For the first time, without the office lights glaring and the hum of computers around them, felt like they were just two men. Not co-workers. Not sketches and subjects. Just Daniel and Ethan. So, Ethan said, leaning back against the booth, eyes glinting in the low light. Tell me something real. Not work. Not safe small talk. Something that matters. Daniel stared at his glass, heart pounding. Why do you keep sketching me? He asked, the question spilling out before he could stop it. Ethan's smile faltered, replaced by something rawer. Because you're the first thing in a long time that makes me want to. That's all. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat suddenly tight. He had expected a joke, a tease. Not this. Do you want me to stop? Ethan asked quietly. Daniel should have said yes. Should have drawn the line. Shut the door. But instead, he whispered, I don't know. and it was the truest thing he had said in years. The night stretched long, conversations weaving between laughter and confessions. Drinks softening Daniel's edges until he found himself telling Ethan things he'd never voiced aloud about the pressure he felt to be perfect, about the weight of family expectations, about the loneliness that came with always pretending. Ethan listened, really listened. No sketches, no smirks, just presence. And when the night ended and they stepped into the cool New York air, Daniel realized he didn't want it to be over. Ethan must have seen it in his eyes, because he leaned in, slow and certain. But just before their lips could meet, Daniel pulled back, panic flashing through him. "I can't," he stammered. Ethan stepped back instantly, jaw tight but voice steady. "Okay. I get it." Daniel's chest ached as he walked away, the ghost of what almost happened burning hotter than anything real. That weekend, Daniel barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ethan leaning in, felt the almost of it. He hated himself for running, hated the fear that had chained him. By Monday, he looked pale, restless. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. But he said nothing, just sketched quietly, the sound of pencil against paper both comfort and torment. Finally, Daniel snapped. "Why do you keep doing this?" He hissed in a low voice, careful not to be overheard. Ethan looked up, startled. "What?" "Drawing me. Looking at me like that. What do you want from me?" Ethan's gaze hardened. Not cruel but firm. "I don't want anything you're not willing to give. But I'm not going to apologize for seeing you. Daniel. Someone has to." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Daniel turned away, furious at Ethan, furious at himself, furious at the truth he couldn't keep buried much longer. The turning point came 2 days later. Their team had a late deadline, the office buzzing with exhaustion. Daniel and Ethan stayed the latest, their desks glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was past midnight when Daniel finally leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "Go home," Ethan said softly, sketchbook balanced on his lap. "You go home," Daniel muttered, too tired to argue. Ethan chuckled, but then his smile faded. "You ever think maybe we're wasting our lives in here? Nights like this?" Daniel sighed. "I think about it every day." Ethan watched him for a long moment. Then, without warning, he tore a page from his sketchbook and slid it across the desk. Daniel looked down and froze. It wasn't just him this time. It was them. Side by side, shoulders touching, heads bent together as if sharing a secret. His throat tightened. "Why would you draw this?" Ethan's voice was steady, almost defiant. "Because it's what I want." Daniel's hands trembled. He wanted to deny it, wanted to push the paper away. But he couldn't. Because for the first time, the picture on the page matched the picture in his heart. And Daniel realized, with terrifying clarity, that he couldn't hide forever. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Daniel knew a decision was coming. The sketches weren't just harmless drawings anymore. They were confessions, invitations, a mirror he couldn't look away from. Ethan had laid his truth bare. Now it was Daniel's turn. And whether he was ready or not, the first act of their story was coming to a close. Daniel told himself that he would keep his distance. That after the midnight sketches, after Ethan had slid that portrait of the two of them across the desk, things had gone too far. He had stared at that drawing too long, memorized the curve of Ethan's smile beside his own face, felt the dangerous longing that it stirred. And so he made a decision he would pull back. Professional. Detached. The way he should have been from the start. But good intentions never survived long in Ethan's orbit. The following week was a blur of deadlines. Their team was preparing a campaign pitch for a major client. One that could mean promotions, bigger budgets, prestige. The office became a battlefield of ideas and revisions, with tempers snapping and coffee running dry. Daniel buried himself in the work. It was easier than thinking about Ethan. Easier than remembering the warmth of his gaze, the quiet defiance in his voice. But Ethan, maddeningly, seemed immune to the pressure. He whistled under his breath, teased their stressed-out coworkers, and still found time to sketch. Daniel noticed one afternoon when he glanced sideways and caught Ethan drawing between slides of data and graphs. He wanted to be angry, wanted to tell him to focus, to be serious. But then he saw the page. It wasn't him this time. Not exactly. It was a hand. Daniel's hand resting on the desk, fingers tense around a pen. The detail was astonishing. Every line and vein captured with reverence. It was intimate. Too intimate. Daniel looked away quickly, heat flooding his face. Something wrong? Ethan asked. Too casual. No, Daniel muttered. But everything was wrong. The night of the pitch arrived. They stood in the sleek boardroom, city lights glittering through the windows, presenting their campaign to a half-circle of executives. Daniel spoke clearly, every word measured, every slide flawless. But the whole time, he felt Ethan's presence beside him like a live wire, his energy reckless but magnetic. The presentation ended. Applause followed. Their team celebrated, relief spilling into laughter and handshakes. And through it all, Ethan's eyes kept finding his. Later, as the office emptied and the adrenaline faded, Ethan leaned on Daniel's desk, grinning. We killed it. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. Yeah, we did. See, Ethan teased. Told you we make a good team. Something in his tone was loaded, and Daniel knew it wasn't about work. He swallowed hard, trying to ignore the pull in his chest. That night, Daniel couldn't resist. He lingered as everyone else left, claiming he had more slides to tidy. Ethan lingered too, of course. It was nearly midnight when Ethan broke the silence. You ever think about it? He asked softly. Daniel looked up, startled. Think about what? Ethan's gaze was steady, unflinching. Us. The word hung heavy in the air. Daniel's stomach twisted. He wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but his voice betrayed him. All the time, he whispered. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ethan stood, walked around the desk, and stopped right in front of him. Daniel, he murmured, almost a plea. And this time, when Ethan leaned in, Daniel didn't pull back. Their lips met tentative at first, then urgent, desperate, as if years of restraint had finally cracked open. Daniel's hands gripped the edge of the desk, Ethan's fingers brushing his jaw. The kiss was messy, unpracticed, but it was real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel stared at him, wide-eyed. We can't. Why not? Ethan whispered. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it again. Because of work. Because of fear. Because of everything. But none of the words came out. Ethan searched his eyes, then nodded, stepping back. Okay. We'll figure it out. Together. The word together lodged in Daniel's chest like a promise. The days that followed were a haze of stolen glances and silent understandings. They didn't talk about the kiss, but it lingered in every look, every brush of hands when papers changed desks. Daniel found himself drawn in, against his own better judgment. He noticed things he hadn't before: the way Ethan's laughter warmed the room, the way he tapped his pencil when lost in thought, the way he always seemed to notice when Daniel was overwhelmed and cracked a joke just to make him breathe again. It was dangerous, addicting, and Daniel was falling, whether he admitted it or not. The fallout came sooner than expected. Marissa, sharp-eyed and too curious for her own good, stopped by their desks one afternoon. She leaned casually against Ethan's chair, chatting about deadlines, when she glanced at the open sketchbook on his desk. "What's this?" she asked, flipping the page before Ethan could stop her. Daniel froze. Marissa's eyes widened. "Wait, is this Daniel?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Marissa," she laughed, oblivious. "Oh my God, you've been drawing him. That's hilarious." Daniel's face burned. He snatched the sketchbook shut, voice clipped. "It's nothing. Just Ethan messing around." Marissa smirked, clearly unconvinced. "Sure. Whatever you say." She walked away, still chuckling. The moment she was gone, Daniel rounded on Ethan. "What the hell was that?" Ethan raised his hands. "Relax. She doesn't know anything. She doesn't have to. What if she says something? What if people start talking?" Ethan's expression hardened. "So what if they do?" Daniel's chest tightened. "You don't get it." "I can't, people can't," he broke off, voice trembling. Ethan studied him for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "You're scared." Daniel didn't answer, because it was true. That night, Daniel couldn't shake the fear. The office was one thing, but if people knew, if whispers started, if rumors spread, wasn't sure he could handle it. He'd spent his whole life keeping walls up, keeping himself safe. And now Ethan threatened to shatter all of it. The next morning, he avoided him. He came in early, left late, kept conversations clipped and professional. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. "You're pulling away," he said flatly one evening, cornering Daniel by the copy machine. "I'm being realistic." Daniel shot back. "Realistic?" Ethan's voice rose, then dropped to a sharp whisper. "You mean cowardly?" The word cut deep. Daniel flinched. Ethan softened immediately, regret flashing across his face. "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," Daniel said bitterly, shoving past him. For the first time, he didn't take the sketch Ethan slid across his desk the next morning. He didn't even look. And for the first time, Ethan didn't smile. The distance between them grew. Daniel told himself it was for the best, that this was safer. But the hollow ache in his chest told another story. One Friday evening, long after everyone else had gone, Daniel lingered at his desk, staring at a blank screen. His apartment was empty, silent. His life outside work was nothing but routine. And all he could think of was Ethan. He closed his eyes, head in his hands. "What am I doing?" he whispered to no one. "Good question," a voice said softly. Daniel's head shot up. Ethan stood there, sketchbook in hand, expression unreadable. "Ethan," Daniel started, but Ethan shook his head. "I can't keep doing this," Ethan said quietly. "I can't keep pouring myself into these sketches, into you, and then watch you run from it every time it gets real." Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm not running. You are," Ethan cut in, voice firm but breaking. "And I get it. Okay. I know you're scared. But I can't be the only one fighting for this." He dropped the sketchbook on Daniel's desk, turned, and walked out. Daniel sat frozen, staring at the closed door. His hands shook as he opened the sketchbook. The page was filled with him, not one drawing, but dozens. His laugh, his frown, the way he leaned on his hand when tired, the way his eyes softened when he forgot to guard them. 1,000 pieces of himself, seen through Ethan's eyes. And for the first time, Daniel cried. The weekend passed like a storm Daniel couldn't escape. He tried burying himself in laundry, groceries, mindless scrolling through his phone, but every quiet moment pulled him back to that sketchbook Ethan had left on his desk. Dozens of drawings. Dozens of him. Every line was a truth Daniel had spent years trying to deny. That Ethan didn't just see him. Ethan understood him. And it terrified him. On Sunday night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with the sketchbook open. Pages scattered like a confession across the wood. He wanted to call Ethan. Wanted to explain. To apologize. But his phone stayed on the counter. Silent. As hours slipped by. Because what could he say? I'm sorry for being afraid. I'm sorry for wanting you but not knowing how to choose you. By midnight, Daniel closed the book and pressed it to his chest, whispering into the empty apartment. I don't want to lose you. But he already had. Monday was unbearable. Ethan didn't greet him. Didn't smile. Didn't sketch. He worked in silence, typing furiously, his face set in a mask Daniel hadn't seen before. Cold. Distant. Daniel tried to speak once. Ethan. Can we? But Ethan cut him off without looking. Busy. The word was a knife. By lunch, Daniel sat alone in the break room, staring at his sandwich, appetite gone. Across the room, he heard laughter, Ethan's, mixed with Marissa's and a couple others. And though he tried not to look, Daniel saw the way Ethan leaned back in his chair. Easy. Carefree. Except Daniel knew better. He knew the laughter was a shield. He knew the smile was a lie. And still, it hurt like hell to see Ethan offer it to everyone but him. The distance stretched on for days. Ethan stopped staying late. He stopped lingering at Daniel's desk. He stopped offering sketches, jokes, glances that lingered too long. It was as if they'd never happened. And for Daniel, that was worse than the risk of being caught. Worse than the fear of whispers. Because at least when Ethan had been sketching him, he'd been seen. Now he was invisible. On Wednesday night, Daniel found himself wandering the city after work. Aimless. Neon lights blurred against the wet pavement. Crowds pushed past him. Strangers with somewhere to go. Someone to see. He ended up outside a small gallery, its windows glowing warm against the drizzle. Inside, people milled about with wine glasses, staring at canvases that looked like splashes of chaos to Daniel's untrained eye. And then he froze, because hanging on the far wall was a charcoal sketch. Familiar. Too familiar. Him. It wasn't labeled, but he knew instantly. His profile. Caught mid-thought. Brows furrowed in concentration. It was one of Ethan's. He'd recognize those lines anywhere. Daniel's pulse hammered. He stumbled inside, ignoring the glances of the patrons, moving straight to the wall. His throat tightened as he read the tiny placard beneath. Artist, Ethan Carter. Daniel's vision blurred. Ethan hadn't just drawn him for himself. He'd put him on display. For the world to see. That night, Daniel showed up at Ethan's apartment door. He hadn't planned it. His feet had carried him there before his brain caught up. Ethan opened the door, surprise flickering across his face before his expression hardened. What are you doing here? Daniel's voice cracked. You put me in a gallery. Ethan leaned against the frame, arms crossed. So what? So what? Daniel echoed, stunned. Ethan, that's me. You showed everyone. You think they know. Ethan cut in. Sharp. You think they look at that sketch and see Daniel right from the ad agency. No. They see a face. A moment. That's it. Daniel shook his head. Words tumbling out. But I know. And I stood there and I felt like you'd stripped me bare in front of strangers. Ethan's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. But then he looked away. That's what you never understood. That's what art is. It's not hiding. It's showing the truth, no matter how ugly or beautiful it is. And you, his voice broke, then steadied. You don't want to be seen. Daniel's chest ached. That's not true. Isn't it? Ethan challenged, finally meeting his eyes. Every time I get close, you run. Every time I show you what you mean to me, you shut down. Tell me, Daniel, what do you actually want? Silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating. Daniel's lips parted, but nothing came, because he didn't know how to answer. Ethan exhaled, long and tired. That's what I thought. And with that, he closed the door. Daniel stumbled home in a daze, rain soaking his shirt, his heart pounding like it might break through his ribs. He wanted to scream, to punch a wall, to undo the moment he'd frozen on Ethan's doorstep. Instead, he sat in the dark of his apartment, staring at the sketchbook Ethan had left him. He flipped through page after page, desperate, as if the drawings might tell him what to do. And then he saw it. A page near the back. One he hadn't noticed before. Different from the others. Not just him sitting at a desk, or frowning at emails. This one was of him smiling. Not the polite, professional smile he offered coworkers, but something softer. A smile Daniel didn't even remember giving. And beside it, scribbled in Ethan's handwriting, the version of you I wish you'd let yourself be. Daniel pressed his forehead to the page, tears sliding down his cheeks. For the first time, he admitted it not just to himself, but aloud. I want you. His voice cracked. I want you, Ethan. But Ethan wasn't there to hear it. The next week at work was agony. Ethan kept his distance, polite but cold. He still joked with others, still smiled at meetings, but with Daniel he was all business. Daniel tried to focus, but the silence between them was louder than any argument. He found himself glancing over constantly, desperate for some sign, some crack in Ethan's mask. But there was nothing. Until Friday afternoon. They were the last ones in the office again, just like before. Daniel sat at his desk, pretending to work, while Ethan packed up his bag. The silence stretched until Daniel couldn't stand it anymore. Ethan. He blurted. Ethan paused, back still turned. What? Daniel's heart raced. He stood, words spilling before fear could stop them. I'm sorry. For running. For being scared. For making you feel like you were fighting alone. Ethan turned slowly, expression unreadable. Daniel took a shaky breath. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to stop being afraid. But I do know one thing, I don't want to lose you. For a moment, Ethan just stared. Then he shook his head, almost laughing. But the sound was bitter. Daniel, you already did. The words hit harder than any punch. Before Daniel could respond, Ethan slung his bag over his shoulder and walked out. And this time, Daniel didn't follow. He sank back into his chair, head in his hands, knowing that for the first time, Ethan might not come back. That weekend was the loneliest of Daniel's life. The city moved on around him, but he felt frozen, stuck in the wreckage of what he'd destroyed. He replayed every moment, every sketch, every kiss. Every time Ethan had looked at him like he was worth the world and wondered how he'd been so blind. By Sunday night, he realized the truth. If he didn't fight for Ethan now, he would regret it for the rest of his life. But by Monday morning, when he arrived at the office, Ethan's desk was empty. A note sat where his sketchbook usually lay. Daniel picked it up with trembling hands. Taking some time off. Don't wait up. No signature. No sketches. Nothing but silence. And just like that, Ethan was gone. Daniel stared at the note on Ethan's desk until the words blurred. Taking some time off. Don't wait up. It wasn't just absence. It was finality. A closing door. Ethan hadn't even signed his name, as if the page itself were a wall Daniel couldn't climb. The office bustled around him, but Daniel felt detached, like sound and motion reached him through water. His coworkers chatted about deadlines. Marissa complained about the coffee machine, and Daniel sat frozen, a note in his trembling hand, wondering how to breathe without Ethan's presence beside him. For weeks, he had feared people noticing them. Now no one noticed Ethan's absence at all. Except Daniel. That night, Daniel walked home through the city, each step heavier than the last. New York was alive, taxis honking, neon signs buzzing, couples laughing under streetlights. The world didn't care that his chest felt hollow, that every breath ached. At his apartment, he set the note on the table beside Ethan's sketchbook. 2 pieces of him, side by side, silence and presence, absence and memory. Daniel poured himself a glass of whiskey and didn't drink it. He sat in the dark, staring at the sketchbook, until finally, with a shaking hand, he opened it again. Page after page. Him, captured from every angle. But this time, he didn't just see Ethan's talent. He saw Ethan's devotion. Each line said what Ethan's words hadn't been able to convince him of. I see you. You matter. You're worth it. And Daniel realized with a force that nearly knocked him breathless that he couldn't let Ethan slip away. Not because of fear. Not because of other people. Not anymore. The next morning, Daniel showed up at work early. He couldn't focus on his projects. Couldn't fake the neat professionalism he wore like armor. Instead, he spent the day searching for Ethan. He tried Ethan's phone straight to voicemail. He tried his email, no response. Finally, desperate, he asked Marissa casually, "Hey, have you heard from Ethan?" She shrugged. He said something about taking a break. Probably in Brooklyn. Why? Daniel forced a smile. Just wondering. Brooklyn. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That evening, Daniel rode the subway, gripping the sketchbook like a compass. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to move. He walked streets lined with brownstones and murals, searching for signs of him. At a cafe, he saw a flyer taped to the window, local artists showcase Saturday night. And there, at the bottom, was Ethan's name. Daniel's chest tightened. 2 days. 2 days until Ethan put himself on display again. Sketches pinned to walls for strangers to admire. Would Daniel be one of them, just another face in the crowd? Or would he fight to be something more? Saturday night came like a storm. Daniel paced his apartment for hours before finally forcing himself out the door. He arrived at the gallery breathless, palms sweating, the sketchbook clutched under his arm. The space was crowded, buzzing with conversation. Paintings and drawings lined the walls, some abstract, some portraits, some landscapes. But Daniel barely saw any of them. He was searching. And then he froze. There was Ethan, across the room, speaking to a small group. He looked different outside the office, looser, freer, sleeves rolled up, hair a little messier. Alive. Daniel's heart ached at the sight. He hovered at the edge of the room, fear pinning him in place. What if Ethan didn't want to see him? What if it was too late? But then his eyes caught on one of the sketches hanging on the wall. It was him. Again. Not the guarded Daniel from the office. Not the cautious man afraid of whispers. This Daniel was laughing, head thrown back, alive in a way he rarely let himself be. Ethan had seen a version of him Daniel barely believed existed. And in that moment, Daniel knew he couldn't run anymore. He crossed the room before fear could stop him. Ethan, he said softly. Ethan turned, surprise flashing in his eyes, quickly replaced by caution. Daniel, what are you doing here? Daniel held up the sketchbook. I had to see you. Ethan's jaw tightened. You shouldn't have. I know, Daniel admitted, voice shaking. But I can't stay away. I don't want to. The group around Ethan exchanged glances and politely drifted away, sensing the weight between them. Daniel swallowed hard, words tumbling out. I was scared. Of being seen. Of losing everything I worked for. Off admitting what I feel. But when you left, I realized I'd already lost the only thing that mattered. Ethan's eyes searched his face. Wary. Unreadable. And what's that? You. Daniel whispered. It's you. The gallery noise faded. The city itself fading. Until all Daniel could hear was his own racing heart. I don't know how to do this perfectly. Daniel continued. I'll mess up. I'll get scared. But I'm done running. If you'll let me, I want to try. With you. Silence stretched. For a heartbeat, Daniel feared Ethan would turn away, that his confession was too late. Then Ethan exhaled, slow and shaky. His eyes softened, and a small, incredulous smile curved his lips. You're serious? Daniel nodded, throat tight. More than I've ever been. Ethan stared at him for a long moment, then reached out, brushing his fingers against Daniel's hand. The touch was tentative, testing. When Daniel didn't pull away, Ethan's smile grew. Took you long enough. Daniel let out a shaky laugh, relief crashing through him. Yeah, I know. The rest of the night blurred. They wandered the gallery together, side by side, the space between them charged but lighter now. Daniel noticed the way Ethan looked at his work pride in his posture, vulnerability in his eyes, and realized he wasn't the only one who'd been scared. Later, when they stepped outside into the cool night, Daniel paused on the sidewalk. Ethan, he said quietly. Yeah. Daniel took a deep breath. Can I kiss you? Not in secret. Not almost. Really kiss you. Ethan's expression softened, something unguarded flickering across his face. Please. And under the glow of a Brooklyn streetlight, Daniel kissed him. No hiding. No hesitation. Just truth. The following week at work felt different. People noticed Ethan was back. Of course they asked where he'd been, teased him for disappearing. But when he and Daniel sat side by side again, sketchbook open between them, Daniel didn't flinch when Ethan's pencil traced his profile. He didn't look away. Because this time, he wasn't afraid of being seen. The Monday after the gallery felt like a rebirth. Daniel arrived early, as usual. Old habits never died, even after revelations under Brooklyn streetlights. But this morning was different. Wasn't alone. Ethan walked in beside him, coffee in one hand, sketchbook in the other. The chatter of coworkers washed over them, harmless now. For the first time, Daniel didn't feel like every eye was watching, judging. He felt lighter. They slid into their desks. The rhythm returned, Daniel typing, Ethan sketching. Except now, when Ethan's pencil scratched the page, Daniel didn't tense. He leaned into it, allowing himself to be seen. "You're smiling," Ethan murmured without looking up. Daniel glanced at him. "Maybe I finally got the joke." Ethan smirked. "Took you long enough." Of course, not everything was easy. Whispers still followed them. Office gossip had a way of sniffing out anything unusual. One afternoon, Marissa leaned against Daniel's desk with a knowing grin. "So," she said, eyes flicking between him and Ethan. "You two spending a lot of late nights together?" Daniel's pulse jumped. His old instincts screamed at him to deflect, to laugh it off, to build another wall. But instead, he glanced at Ethan, who arched an eyebrow, daring him silently. Daniel drew a steady breath. "Yeah, we are." Marissa blinked, clearly expecting denial. Then she smiled, almost approving. "Good. About time someone knocked the grump out of you." Ethan chuckled as she walked away. Daniel shot him a look. "Don't." "I didn't say anything," Ethan replied, grinning. "But you heard Harry less of a grump now." Daniel shook his head, but inside, warmth spread through him. Every time he chose honesty, the weight he'd carried for years grew lighter. Their world expanded beyond the office. Weekends turned into slow mornings in Ethan's loft, sunlight spilling through windows. Coffee cooling on the table while Ethan sketched, Daniel still tangled in the sheets. "Don't draw me like this," Daniel would mutter, pulling the blanket higher. "Why not?" Ethan teased. "It's when you're most honest." And Daniel realized he didn't hate it. In fact, he cherished it. To be known so deeply, to be seen without armor, it terrified him and freed him all at once. But freedom wasn't without fear. One evening, Daniel's father called. A rare event. Their relationship had been polite but distant since Daniel moved to the city. "Work going well?" his father asked. "Yes," Daniel answered carefully. "Good. You're making something of yourself." A pause. "You're not distracted, are you?" The question stung, as if his father could sense the shift in him, the joy he no longer bothered to hide. Daniel glanced at Ethan, lounging on the couch, sketchbook balanced on his knees. For a moment, the old fear surged back. The urge to lie, to protect himself from disappointment, from rejection. But then Ethan looked up, met his eyes, and smiled soft, grounding. Daniel cleared his throat. "No, not distracted. Just finally happy." There was silence on the other end. Then his father sighed. "That's good, son." It wasn't approval. Not really. But it wasn't rejection either. And for the first time, Daniel realized he didn't need permission. His life, his happiness, belonged to him. Months passed. Seasons shifted. Their desks remained side by side, pencils and keyboards clashing in rhythm. Their lives tangled together, messy, imperfect, beautiful. One night in December, as snow fell outside Ethan's window, Daniel flipped through the latest sketchbook. Page after page of himself, sometimes serious, sometimes laughing, sometimes vulnerable in ways he hadn't known he showed. He stopped at the final page. It wasn't just him. It was them. Side by side at their desks, shoulders brushing, a quiet intimacy drawn in pencil lines. "You drew us," Daniel whispered. Ethan, lying beside him, propped himself on an elbow. "Of course I did. That's the whole story." isn't it? Daniel's throat tightened. He looked at Ethan, at the man who had dismantled his walls with sketches and patience, who had turned fear into freedom. Ethan, he said softly, I love you. Ethan froze for a heartbeat, eyes widening. Then his expression softened into something almost reverent. Say it again. Daniel smiled, shaky but real. I love you. Ethan leaned in, kissed him slow, like a promise. When he pulled back, he whispered, Good. Because I love you too. Have for a long time. The snow outside thickened, blanketing the city in silence. Inside, Daniel finally felt at home. Life didn't stop being complicated. Work had deadlines. The city had noise. People had opinions. But none of it mattered the way it used to. Because now, Daniel knew he could be both the professional in crisp shirts and the man who let himself be sketched in the quiet hours. He could be ambitious and vulnerable, cautious and reckless. And every day, at the desk beside Ethan's, he chose to be seen. Years later, when someone new joined their office and sat across from them, the whispers started again. The rookie leaned over to Marissa and whispered, Are they like a thing? Marissa smirked. They've always been a thing. You'll get used to it. Daniel overheard, and instead of shrinking, he smiled. Ethan caught his glance, winked, and kept sketching. The world hadn't ended. It had only begun. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.